So, as the most recent update, Earl did call me this morning right before 9 o'clock. They woke him up and told him that they thought they were about to lose her because her blood pressure dropped, her heart rate dropped. She still has fluid around her lungs. They did bring her back, got her heart rate back up, her breathing rate back up. Oxygen, I think he said, was around 98. Heart rate is 93 over 60 something, which is normal for her. Not normal, but it's normal for her. Weird whining noise for the they said that they are kind of touch and go for the next couple of hours. So she's still not out of the woods yet. They were not able to get a tube into her to clear her lungs. So that's kind of where they're at right now. They're still working on getting that tube in her to clear her lungs. But he did ask that everybody continue to pray for her. Because as it is right now, it looks like she might not make it through the day. Pretty all right. So Annette said that Steve told her that he would be back in a few days. Is that what I'm saying? Yeah. Sometime this week. His building project should be done. When we got cold temperatures and wet weather, that makes it kind of hard to get a building project done pretty quick. So he should be back. And Joseph is feeling kind of well. He still has a little bit of a cough, but he's not like too bad. The biggest thing with his fever has been dehydration. It hasn't been the flu or anything, so he's pretty much over that. If I understand correctly, he was released Thursday, so he should go back for his next treatment 2 weeks from this last Thursday. So that time's going to go by pretty quick. Sarah has made the decision not to go up and see Nancy because she is taking care of Joseph. The staph that's in her lungs is MRSA, which makes it really difficult for treatment because that's like the worst bacterial bug that we know of. One of the worst. That's methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus. The only other antibiotic that we can treat for it is vancomycin. And if it becomes resistant to vancomycin, then we don't have anything else to treat it. So they try not to give vancomycin unless it's a dire emergency. So that's kind of where.
Do you know if it catches easier or whatever?
It's not necessarily that it catches easier. It's just a really bad bug. It's what we call a super infection.
I did when I was working in the hospital.
It can spread faster to people that are working with those patients because they're around it all the time, and it can spread to what we call immunocompromised, or people that are really old, people that are really sick, infants. So, yeah.
I used to ask this. I was correct there Thursday. We were with her pretty close. So yeah. I didn't know how that worked.
Sarah's kind of a little bit nervous because if she got any of it on her, then she could spread it to Joseph. So, yeah.
I will take my chances.
I don't know how you would know that you got it till, early.
Yeah. With it being in the lungs, it would be spread through a cough, sneeze, sneeze, water droplets, things like that. Typically, MRSA is a wound infection, and so you would have to come in contact with the wound. So this one's a little bit different. So as long as everybody was wearing a mask and things like that.
Because they told us we didn't need to.
We took our masks off.
Yeah, and at that time, they didn't know that it was MRSA.
No, they didn't know,
It was
no.
like the day after, I think.
Yeah, we were there Thursday, and Saturday, Earl told me.
Yeah.
Well,
I think we got the text message Friday that they knew what it was.
Okay, so it was there Thursday. He found out on Saturday.
that's okay.
That's all right.
How? If I didn't call them, I know.
All right, so we're gonna go ahead and just kind of start chapter 4 as if we don't know what's going on. I don't, because honestly, I didn't study it, so we're gonna read it. And these notes have it broken up into the first 6 verses. So let's just go ahead and read the first 6 verses. 1 Peter chapter 4. For as much then as Christ suffered in the flesh, arm ye yourselves also with the same mind. For he that hath suffered in the flesh hath ceased from sin, that ye no longer should live the rest of your time in the flesh to the lust of men, but to the will of God. For the time past may suffice to have wrought the desire of the Gentiles, and to have walked in lasciviousness, lusts, wine-bibbings, revellings, carousings, and abominable idolatries, wherein they think it strange that ye run not with them into the same excess of riot, speaking evil of you. Who shall give account to him that is ready to judge the living and the dead? For unto this end was the gospel preached, even to the dead, that they might be judged indeed according to men in the flesh, but live according to God in the Spirit. Okay, so the first line here is, for as much as Christ suffered, and specifically it says suffered in the flesh. Besides Christ, we have examples of suffering from the prophets in the Old Testament, but Christ is the ultimate example of suffering because he suffered in the flesh on the cross for everyone. And he also says, arm ye yourselves also with the same mind. Ephesians chapter 6, this is where we're told to put on the armor of God, and tells us every piece of the armor, what it stands for. And he's kind of saying the same thing here, arm yourselves. Put on that armor of God. But here specifically he says with the same mind. He tells us in another place what that mind is. What is the mind that we should all have the same?
Mind of God.
The mind of God, right?
I have a reference to 1 Corinthians 1:18.
Okay.
Now I beseech you, brethren, by the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, that you all speak the same God, and that there be no division among you, but that you perfectly joined together in the same mind and in the same judgment.
Right. And if we are in the same mind, there's going to be no divisions. This is where denominationalism gets it wrong. They say, well, as long as we all believe in God, we're okay. Well, we can believe in the same God, but if we're teaching different doctrine, we're not of the same mind. Right. That is the author of confusion if we're teaching different things. We might have the same head, but if we branch off into a different body, then Christ becomes a monster.
Also, Corinthians 1:18.
Okay?
For the preaching of the cross is to them that perish foolishness, but unto us which are saved is the power of God.
Right, and that gets into which verse was it here? The last few verses here, verse 6, they think it's strange, or verse 4, sorry, they think it's strange that you don't run with them. Yeah. Foolishness. Preaching of the cross is foolishness. That was the thing with the Greeks. The Greeks wanted everybody to gather around, and they were teaching the wisest, what they thought was the wisest, smartest things of the day. But to teach something so simple as this man dying on the cross for the sins of the world, and all you have to do to be obedient and enter into his church is be baptized, that's too simple for them. They wanted this deep, metaphorical thing, and that's not what it was all about. So we have to be of the same mind, and the denominations teach us that we can all believe in God and be okay, but yet they all teach something different. And Jesus says that the church is one body, his body. But if we're teaching different doctrines, we make Christ multiple bodies. And so he becomes a monster. And that's not what he is. Verse 1, he that hath suffered in the flesh hath ceased from sin. Is it possible for us to be in Christ and not sin? Yes, it's possible. But how many of us are going to 100% resist temptation? Probably not. Yeah.
Well, it says in that one, if you say you sin, you're a liar. All men have sinned.
And that kind of goes back before we obey the gospel, too.
Yes.
Because that's the whole reason we need Christ, is because we have sinned.
Well, it says it all. And come short of the will of God.
Right.
And even afterwards, like you said, though, even, you have thoughts that
Right.
they're not right. Everybody struggles with it on a daily basis, I would imagine.
And I think that's what a lot of people got to look at the way too. It's not just fleshly sin, it's thoughts.
Yes.
You know.
That's the hardest for me.
Yeah.
Is the thoughts,
But we have to remember, it doesn't negate the fact and doesn't prevent us from not being able to sin. Christ gave us that example. If we just say, well, he was deity, and that's the only reason that he was without sin, then it makes it impossible for us to be without sin.
There was a preacher on the radio on Tuesdays that was talking about Job. I thought about Job. Job said, God giveth, and the Lord taketh away.
And one thing too, you look at prayer without ceasing. What relates that prayer to war? Not just for others, but for yourself. That repent is part of those prayers. But you repent that way as well as you pray that as well too.
Yeah. And the hardest thing about this is the times that we don't recognize that we sin. Is it possible to sin without recognizing it?
Yes.
Yes, it is.
That's when we
It's hard for us to believe that, but it is.
Christ to be our mediator.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there's somewhere in here, I can't remember the verse, that's what it says, even for the son, even the ones that we did not know they did. So
Yeah.
what we do.
And-
There's paganism in the world, how could you not?
Yeah, and we shouldn't say that we're completely without excuse, because most of the sin that we commit, we're going to know about, because it's going to be willful sin. But with all of the idolatry that's mixed in the world, like you said, and that's just one example, it's going to be so difficult to know what's going on.
And then you got the scripture, are we seeking, are we knocking? So are we seeking his word? Are we seeking him not just coming, listening, but actually wanting to know? There's some things I didn't know until I talked to you personally, outside of worship, that I didn't know that could possibly be hindering me. That I thought maybe through tradition or my own understanding that
See, and that's the big thing too, is when it comes to the holy days that, whether it's in America or across the world, that people traditionally celebrate, they're blinded by these traditions, and they don't, whether it's willful ignorance or not, they don't know because they've been trained and raised from a baby to do these things, and they just don't see. But if we truly open up our minds to what God has told us in the Bible, then we can see that these things are a holy day and they come from paganism and not from God.
This is why we are to search the scriptures daily, because if you do, then you learn and you find a lot, most of it's out pretty much.
Yeah.
If not all, I mean, pretty close. If you search scripture, that's why that's good advice. Some of these people probably don't. A lot of people go to church and don't open the Bible, don't read it.
And it goes back to what Chris said. Are we truly seeking God, or are we just seeking our own desires, our own lusts, our own ambitions?
Going through the motions.
Even people in the Lord's church, they just want to tickle their own fancies, tickle their own desires, whatever you want to call it. And we just want what the heart wants. We don't think about what God wants when it comes to worship. And so when it comes to celebrating holy days, it's all about what we want, what makes us feel good, what makes us happy, and we put God in the back burner. And when somebody tells us for the first time, hey, this is a pagan tradition, we're not supposed to be doing this, the first thing that comes to mind, and I thought this too, is anger. You're telling me that all this that I've been doing my whole life, that my family's been doing my whole life, is wrong in God's eyes? And you're telling me that it's paganism? I can't believe that.
I don't want to believe that.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what it is. I don't want to believe that. And we put those mental roadblocks up. And you think about it too when it comes to just obeying the gospel. You mean you're telling me I haven't been baptized and I have to be baptized in order to be pleasing to God? My grandma and grandpa weren't baptized and they died. Are you telling me they're in hell? I'm not telling you anything. I'm just telling you what the Bible says. And that anger comes up. And we see that same anger when it comes to different forms of worship.
And some people think, oh, you have to just be baptized. Some people are baptized. We even done it here. I've seen this where they didn't truly understand why they're being baptized. It does no good if you don't understand what you're doing.
Right. And that's why teaching is something that should come before and after baptism. And that's all a part of having the same mind. Teaching is involved in that. If we just focus specifically on baptism and don't do anything else, people aren't going to have the same mind. It all comes down to the doctrine. And it's not our doctrine, it's the doctrine of Christ. That's how we have the same mind, is share that doctrine, not ours, not Chris's, not mine, not quote-unquote Church of Christ doctrine, Christ doctrine. That's what's important. So we have to have the same mind, and we understand that it's the mind of Christ. All right, verse 2, that you no longer should live the rest of your time in the flesh to the lust of men. That kind of goes back to what we've been talking about too, is this change of mind, change of life. We put away Romans chapter 6. We bury that old man and rise in newness of life. We got to get rid of all those lusts of the flesh. Those are listed in Ephesians as well. They're listed in other places, but he's specifically talking about the lust of the flesh and then the fruit of the Spirit after that. And he contrasts those two. We should no longer have the lust of the flesh. That is that pleasure of what makes us feel good.
whether it's spiritually feeling good or tactile, whatever it may be, anything that makes us feel good that doesn't come from God, we got to get rid of those things.
Peter wants to slice his own ear out.
Mhm.
Jesus had to remind him, he won't do it his way. This is-
Yeah.
it's not good.
Live by the sword, die by the sword. And there he's not condemning self-defense, but Peter wasn't going with self-defense. He was trying to take up for Christ. And in that time period, right then and right there, Christ didn't need any defense. He didn't need anybody to take up for him physically, because what needed to happen was him be taken into custody. That had to happen. That was in God's plan. So, yeah. And Peter was acting impetuously. He wasn't thinking. And so that was by his own lust, his own desire. He wasn't thinking clearly. Yeah. And the next line there in the last part, but to the will of God. We need to put our will aside and put God's will in front. And this is a lot of times what we hear in our prayers when we're praying for other people that are sick. If it be your will, let this person recover. And we think of Christ when he was suffering in the garden. Not my will, but your will be done.
It's one of the hardest things in prayer, is to mean that when you say your will be done.
Exactly.
Sometimes we're human, right?
Yep.
We know what we want. We don't want it to be how it
Right.
could be. It might be his will.
We want that person to fully recover and come back because we want to selfishly spend more time with that person. But if we have truly given it over to God, we have done everything that we're supposed to do to help that person, whatever that may be, then it's in God's hands at that point. And we have to truly accept whatever happens. And that, you're absolutely right, that is the hardest thing to do.
That is a big test of your faith. Right there.
Yeah. And I remember when Joseph first got his diagnosis, there were some people I forgot to tell. I had prayed, and I probably prayed 2 or 3 times, and I let it go. I just completely let it go. And I forgot to call and tell my mom. And usually Sarah's the one that makes all the connections and everything. And she was going to let me talk to my mom. And it just completely slipped my mind because I had prayed about it and forgot about it and let it go. I wasn't worried. I wasn't concerned because it was all in God's hands. But there is still that personal nature of the relationships you have with everybody around you. It's not necessarily a worry or a concern, but you still have to make those connections. And so, in my mind, I had just forgotten about it. And so, we have to be careful about that too. But we can't worry. We can't fret. My brother called me about a week or so ago, and he had just gotten off the phone with Aaron. And I've been praying for Aaron. Aaron doesn't talk to me anymore, but he's still living with his mom. And apparently in this conversation, him and my brother were having this little argument back and forth, and Aaron had told him that he was addicted to fentanyl. And so my brother was really mad at him. And he calls me and he says, how do you do it? How do you let things go? How do you relax? As a parent, how can you just let him be his own person? And I said, well, you have to remember there's the things you can't control. And your kids are one of those. They're going to make their decisions. You can can teach them everything you can, but you can't control certain things. And another thing too is you're over 1,000 miles away from them, so you can't do much about that anyways. And I said, once I pray about it, I let it go. And I mentioned Joseph, and the first thing he did is he just melted because he knows about what's going on with Joseph. And I said, I've told you before, when it comes to anything in life that you can't control, you just have to let it go. Because you're not going to be able to force people to do things. And then I told him again about being over 1,000 miles away from him. And so he kind of relaxed after that, but he was so uptight about his son doing these certain things and how he couldn't control it. And that's the way he is he wants to be able to put his thumb on a certain situation and try to control it. And we can't do that. We can't force people to do things the way we want.
That's hard to go from them being an adult, because you could as when they're children.
Right.
And it's hard to back off and quit when you're an adult, because it does make a man.
And that's what we have to do when it comes to praying for certain things too. And there's always something we can do, but we can't control the outcome. And that's what we have to remember is we're not in control. God's in control. So we have to just let it go. And yes, it's hard. It's easy to say. It's harder to do, but that's what we have to do for our mental well-being, for our physical well-being, and for our spiritual well-being between us and God. We have to be able to let it go, because that's where we have true faith, is to say, God, I trust you to take care of this. You're going to do what you're going to do. And then if it's God's will to take that person, we have to be able to accept them. Now, did he take them into Abraham's bosom? Did he allow them to go into torment? Again, that's on between him and that person. We won't know until Judgment Day. But hopefully their heart was right. And again, that's not on us. If we have done everything we were supposed to do, that's not on us. I still feel a little guilt when I think about my dad, because I didn't do any teaching the last time I saw him. But all I can do is repent and move on. And we have to remember that too, is that we have our responsibilities. But if we didn't take care of that and it's too late, we got to pray about it and move on. Because there's other souls in this life that we need to take care of. We can't sit on that. Okay, anything else on those two verses? Okay. Verse 3. For the time past may suffice to have wrought the desire of the Gentiles, and have walked in lasciviousness, lust, wine-bibbings, revellings, carousings, and abominable idolatries, wherein they think it strange that you run not with them in the same excess of riot, speaking evil of you. Have we had people that spoke evil of us because we didn't do the same bad things they do? Yeah. The generation we have around us right now, the teenagers, most of my students, they find it strange that I don't go out and get drunk or I don't smoke. They don't believe me when I tell them that I don't do that stuff. Because a lot of the adults that they have around them, whether it's their parents or other teachers, that's what the adults do. That's what they see. And so when they hear of an adult that doesn't do these things, they just can't believe it.
Yeah, there's a lady I know that has a daughter who used to go to school in this private Christian school. Well, they had to go to public school, this only goes to 6th grade this year. And she was worried about how she was going to adjust. And her daughter come home and said, those kids have the foulest mouth
Seventh grade is where they start saying the kids are the worst. Now, they don't mature very much after that, but that's what they say is the seventh graders are always the worst classes, the most worst behaved. But yeah, and when you try to send kids to the office, not much gets done. They'll send them right back, and the kids will just kind of laugh about it because they know nothing about that.
You gotta face it based on their behavior. You have to do it. The way the kids are today.
Yeah.
Teach them how to deal with that.
And they know, you should explain them,
Oh, yeah.
But that kept you from doing a lot of stuff. We didn't want that handle from Mr. Sullivan, he did handle it really well. So, but you can't do, they know you can't do anything, so I'd act like they do.
I remember days teachers used to give me class. Let's go to the office right there in class.
And the parents used to say, I know my parents did, if you get in trouble at school, or you get moved to school, you get moved at home. Well, now the parents will go and fight tooth and nail for those kids, even if they're acting terrible.
Oh, yeah.
Which sets that example.
Yep. I don't know who this person was, but when Sarah was working at the junior high last year, there was a girl that was called in because I think it was marijuana was found in her bag, and it wasn't, and it was definitely found in her bag. And so the parent got called in. It wasn't that the parent was upset that the marijuana was actually there. She wasn't mad at the kid. Automatically, the school was just accusing, or she was automatically just going to accuse the school of being racist. So, it
Really got off topic.
yeah, it did, yeah. They had called the cops in and everything because it was marijuana, and she didn't want to face the fact that her daughter had marijuana on her and could go to juvie for this. She just wanted to try to go around all of that and get out of it by using the race card. And that's the problem with a lot of our kids today is we don't address the problems that are really there, which are drugs, sex, alcohol. And we try to focus on other issues by parents trying to go with some other issue.
They don't take responsibility to, as far as the point of, well, my parents did this to me 20 years ago, and that's why I do this.
Mhm.
They don't accept responsibility for their actions.
Yeah.
But if your parents don't make you accept responsibility for your actions at a young age, they're gonna do that way.
And so when we don't contribute, when we don't go along with everybody else in this stuff, we're going to be seen as weird. We're going to be seen as different, strange. Some people might actually get mad that we don't participate.
Make fun of them. That happens a lot, they make fun.
Yeah, it's true. And that is persecution. Now, if we're not getting beat up for it or having our lives threatened, that's not severe persecution like some in the first century had. We're getting to that point in this country. But it is a form of persecution. So, we need to be willing to withstand. It shows a weakness in faith if we break down simply because people think we're weird or we're getting made fun of simply because that's not severe persecution. We haven't seen persecution if that's all we're getting, because that's not that. Verse 5, who shall give account to him that is ready to judge the living and the dead? In other words, if we can survive all of that, we need to make sure we're ready to give an account on Judgment Day. who's going to be the judge? Christ specifically, because he's the one that withstood all this persecution and still had no sin. He is the only one that is able to be a good judge. So he's going to be the judge of the living and the dead. This is speaking spiritually here, living and dead. Verse 6, for unto this end was the gospel preached even to the dead, spiritually dead, and they might be judged indeed according to men in the flesh, but live according to God in the Spirit. I say spiritually dead. We have Acts chapter 2. Let's go to Acts chapter 2. This is Peter's sermon on Pentecost. Let's see if I can find the exact verses here. He's taking David's prophecy, and he says he's not speaking of David because David is still in the tomb. Let me see if I can find that. Verse 25. For David saith concerning him, I beheld the Lord always before my face, for he is on my right hand, that I should not be moved. Therefore my heart was glad, and my tongue rejoiced. Moreover, my flesh also shall dwell in hope, because thou wilt not leave my soul in Hades, neither wilt thou give the Holy One to see corruption. Thou madness known unto me the ways of life, thou shalt make me full of gladness with thy countenance. Brethren, I may say unto you freely of the patriarch David, that he both died and was buried, and his tomb is with us unto this day. Being therefore a prophet, and knowing that God had sworn with an oath to him, that of the fruit of his loins he would set one upon his throne. He, foreseeing this, spake of the resurrection of the Christ, and neither was he left unto Hades, nor did his flesh see corruption. So he was talking about Christ going, dying and being resurrected. But there's another spot that talks about Jesus preaching unto those that were in Hades. There's a spot that talks about Jesus preaching unto the souls that were dead or in Hades. And I'm wondering if that too could be what's being talked about here in 1 Peter 4 and verse 6. Alright, maybe I'm wrong. Alright. But we will have to give an account one day.
Not because of that scripture, but also the spirits.
Yeah, and that may be what I'm thinking about, because it's not physical prison here on earth. talking about the spirits that were in Hades. So I'll have to find that. Okay. All right, so we're going to have to be ready to give an account one day, and that's why we can't give in to the same evil sins that the world gives into. Like he said in verse 2, we have to give up the lusts of the flesh when we are with Christ. Be of the same mind which is of Christ, verse 1. Okay. Anything else in the first 6 verses? Okay. We'll go ahead and start the next section, verses 7 through 11. We've only got a few minutes left here. All right, verse 7. But the end of all things is at hand. Be ye therefore of sound mind, and be sober unto prayer. Above all things, being fervent in your love among yourselves, for love covereth a multitude of sins, using hospitality one to another without murmuring, according as each hath received a gift, ministering it among yourselves as good stewards of the manifold grace of God. If any man speak, speaking as it were oracles of God, if any man ministereth, ministering as of the strength which God supplieth, that in all things God may be glorified through Jesus Christ, whose is the glory and the dominion forever and ever. Amen. But the end of all things is at hand. What end do we think this is? Who's he writing to at the beginning of this letter? What kind of Christians? Jewish Christians. So the end that he's referring to is probably the destruction of Jerusalem. So again, it's a warning that that end is coming. Be ye therefore of sound mind, sober. He's, let's see here, sound. Oh, I had the I've been reading from the American Standard. Yeah. I did not catch that. But sober-minded, sound-minded, this is most likely the same Greek word that we have from 1 Timothy and all the places that are talking about the qualifications of an elder. It's not necessarily talking about not drinking or anything like that, but just being clear-headed. In other words, be prepared. Make sure your prayers are the right kind of prayers and you're in the right place. Because the time is at hand. All right. Verse 8, above all things, being fervent in your love among yourselves, for love covereth a multitude of sins. We've seen this in other places where I believe it's Galatians chapter 6 that it tells us kind of the same thing. Not to be busybodies, but we are to pray for other people's sins. We can't forgive their sins in the sense of we can't ask for their forgiveness. They still have to ask for their own forgiveness. But we can pray for them because my sins could influence you guys. And so everybody should be praying for everybody else, that they are doing the right things. because each other's sins could influence another and cause someone else to fall. We should be fervent in love. This fervent goes back to, I believe it's James, the effectual fervent prayer of a righteous man availeth much. Fervent means active and alive. So not only should our prayer life be active and alive, but our love for one another should be something that is continuous, active, and alive. Using hospitality one to another without murmuring. Paul tells those in Philippians that they're not to murmur and complain, but to do work. According as each hath received a gift, ministering it among yourselves as good stewards of the manifold grace of God. This is probably miraculous gifts, but we also have other talents that we could have that are not miraculous. And everybody should be ministering in some way, serving God in some way. So we're all supposed to be good stewards of whatever abilities we have. And we can go back to the parable of the talent. And then verse 11, if any man speaketh, speaking as it were oracles of God. This is, an oracle is someone who is given a direct message. So we should speak as if it's God's own words, coming directly from him. It's not our words. If any man ministereth, ministering as of the strength which God supplieth. We all have some type of service we can do. And so God gives us strength. We should pray for that strength and continue to minister in whatever way that we are able. That in all things God may be glorified through Jesus Christ, not our glory, God's glory. He deserves it all. Who is in the glory and the dominion forever and ever. Amen. Okay. Any questions or comments on this section? Okay. Verse 11 is probably one that we use quite a bit, and it's pretty important because we should always remember that everything that we're given, even God's own words, are not ours. And we should feel blessed for everything that we have and give God the glory. So, all right, we can pick up on verse 12 next week. We'll have to play it by ear to see if Earl's back or